Good evening, folks. I am going to talk a little bit tonight about training zone. What is a training zone? What is incremental training? Because this is pillar number 4 of the 5 pillars of DNRS, but it's also a life principle that is really important if we want to do things efficiently. Because a lot of times, a lot of people who are recovering from LSI, and there are certain people in life who just have a habit of going all in on something in a way that just kind of makes them peter out immediately, or they get injured, or it's just too intense, it's too much too fast. And so, and even in life in general, life has a training zone. We all have a zone in which we're capable of what we're fit for. We're fit for this zone. Our life, has prepared us to be able to do this much. And anything beyond that is not within reach unless we train for it. So that's why it's called the training zone, because you continue, moving forward with your training. So, because I have a lot of experience walking with a lot of people, I've kind of noticed it's something I had to really I took a lot of creative license with my definition of a training zone. It's kind of like, I love to cook, but whenever I start with a recipe, by the time I'm done with it, it was like, that's not what the recipe was. Like, that's not, I took it and made it into something else. So this is kind of my take on training zone, because every coach you talk to, every person you talk to is going to have a different take on what worked for them, because this is a highly individual process. Recovery is, and being human is a highly individual process. So this is my take for what it's worth. Hopefully this helps some people out there with a typical approach, because it's not typical. So hopefully it helps some of you where the typical approach has not worked. So first thing is, what's the purpose of incremental training? So incremental training means we do something, a little bit that would ordinarily trigger the limbic system and create symptoms. That's kind of the point, or symptoms of some kind or something like that. Whether it's, just like you're trying to trigger something that would do something that would normally trigger anxiety, or you're doing something that would trigger other symptoms, doesn't matter. But that's the idea. And there's 2 reasons that we do incremental training. One is to create neuroplasticity, because when you trigger the brain a little bit, it makes your brain neuroplastic, meaning it creates this heightened state in which it's easier to change your brain function. So it's just kind of like you're jogging the brain loose a little bit and making it easier to change your brain patterns. So that's the first reason why we do incremental training and do something that's a little bit on the triggering side. The second is to create, or to kind of change our association with our triggers. So, and this is, again, I personally only used incremental training the way it's laid out for like maybe the first year and a half or so of my recovery. Once I didn't have physical things to trigger on, I just started using life as my training zone. So this really applies, the creating positive associations applies to anything in your life that your brain perceives as negative. And that could be like, there's something very basically limbic, like a food, or a chemical, or an activity like walking or driving, or running, or whatever, what have you, doesn't, your things are. Or again, it could be a person or a place. Like, it took me a long time to make my home a really positive place for myself to be, and it took a long, long time for that. So, and a lot of work, a lot of repetition, lots of repetition. So just whatever that is, that's what you want to create. Your brain has a negative association, and exposing yourself to it, being in that space, allows you to change the association. So that's one of the points of it. And again, if we want to succeed at something, it's important to understand how it works, and part of that's understanding why are we doing this. So that's why. Okay, so these are the things I see people run into, and this is, again, my dearest hope with my videos and my coaching and my life in general is to give people information that would allow them to move forward when ordinarily they would remain stuck indefinitely. And I was most certainly stuck indefinitely with some of these aspects. Like the first one the first factor that comes into play, and this comes into play for a lot of people, is your life in your training zone. Is how much work you're doing in your training zone. And that's, for me, it took me, like, I realized this last week. I was like, it took me like 3 years to stop trying to make a life that wasn't authentic. Not just the amount of work, but the kind of work and the lifestyle and all of that. Like, it took me a couple of years to figure out that my trying to incrementally train on that wasn't going to work, because that doesn't fit with who I am. And the whole process of recovery is one of becoming authentic. And when you find who you truly are, and you're like, oh, my line of work or my work schedule or my lifestyle is completely incongruent with me being authentic to myself, a lot of times we have to make a really massive change to lifestyle in order to make this work. And you definitely want to take your time doing that. But at the same time, it's one thing where, and I always say healing begins when we're honest with ourselves. So if you were having trouble trying to figure out what your training zone is, and you just kind of always feel like you're not quite in your training zone, and you're having a hard time getting a handle on your limbic system, it's hard to feel like things are ever calm. Things always feel like they're either on the brink of being out of control or they are out of control. A lot of times, look at your overall lifestyle and ask yourself, is this really sustainable? Like, is this in my training zone right now? Honestly, is it? Because, and I think the idea is we want to avoid all the financial decisions and the family decisions and the relationship decisions and the living situation decisions that are kind of attached to that question. But this is your life. This is literally the rest of your life. So it's easy, like, and again, for me, I had to make that decision, like, life kind of forced my hand, because I didn't. The first, the first 6 months, and even at many other points in my recovery, I just tried to conform myself to the life that I had been living before that was not authentic to myself, and it didn't work. My brain and my life kind of forced me to acknowledge that wasn't working and it wasn't ever going to work. I had to create a whole new life and stop pushing myself to conform to something that wasn't going to work. So it's just important to have that conversation with yourself about what your priorities are, because recovery gets you a freedom you can't imagine. It gets you your well-being and your health and a freedom possibly that you've never known before, and endless possibilities if you put your recovery first. But if recovery never comes first, it doesn't happen and you stay stuck. So just have that conversation with yourself if you're feeling like things are always ramped up and you can't quite get a handle. Because one of the things a lot of times when I, in coaching and in walking with people, the thing that I used to say, and a lot of people I hear say, is, oh, but my job, like, I have to work, or I've got to do this. And it's like, but if that's the thing keeping you stuck because it doesn't fit in your training zone, then you need to get creative, and you can. So again, I kind of wish I had taken that more seriously earlier in my recovery. It would have saved me a lot of time, but I learned the lesson in the long run, so have that conversation with yourself. Okay, another thing to be really clear on that's not, and this isn't explained in DNRS, but I intuitively understood this as I was rewiring, and I tell people this pretty often. One of the most important parts of incremental training is catching your pops before, during, and after you do the incremental training. So say, for example, you're going to take a walk, maybe like a half a mile walk. If you're not walking at all and you start walking a half a mile, it's important to not let yourself think beforehand, oh, I'm gonna be taking a walk later, then let your brain, because like your brain's gonna be like immediately like, oh my god, all the things are gonna happen, all the bad things are gonna happen, the it's are gonna happen, and this is and that's gonna happen, and then the world's gonna end. And so the present moment's the only one we have in which to rewire our brain. All brain rewiring happens in the present moment. So before, and I still use this in regards to many various situations in my life that I'm still training around. It's bigger things, it's not walking, but don't let yourself think about it. Live your way there, live your way through it. You don't think of it whenever you are. If that thought comes to your mind of what about tomorrow, what about later today, be like, yeah, that's not right now. I'll take care of that then. And just stay in the present moment. When you're in an elevated emotional state, you can do anything. That is the key to being a superhero and having the superpower of DNRS is being in an elevated emotional state, because you're tapping into healthy neuronal pathways. So catch those pops when it comes time to do the incremental training. And sometimes it's just sitting. Doesn't really matter what it is. Make sure you have a mood elevator that you're utilizing to keep your mood elevated the entire time you're in your incremental training, whether it's sitting, whether it's being in a location, or whatever it is. Make sure you've got something and you're keeping your mood elevated, because you want to create a positive association with this, and you do not want to let those old cross-wired, limbic trauma loops starting to run in the background. So you need to have a positive mood elevator. Going headfirst into something that normally triggers you without any tools is setting yourself up for failure, basically. So just make sure you've got something with you to do that, and then make sure you're doing rounds immediately afterwards. That's really important to kind of cement that this was a positive experience and keep your brain in that positive pathway as you go about your day. Because ultimately, you're basically telling your brain, hey, this activity or this food or this thing, it's nothing. It's literally nothing. It's just nothing. It's like, I'm just living my life. That's the message you want to give your brain with incremental training. So have that attitude as you go through it of like, this is nothing. You're just going about doing your thing, having a good time, having a grand old time, whatever it is you're doing. And then you just keep on having a grand old time because life's amazing and it's just expanding every day, and that's something to be happy about. So that's it with that. Okay, the one thing that's really important here, and this is another area where I see it's a small hole you have to get through it, and I see a lot of people get stuck here a lot. So this is really key. It's really important in this process of rewiring to let go of your fear of its. That's part of recovery, and this incremental training is a great opportunity to do so, because a lot of times the limbic system will resist because it knows you. I mean, again, if you're triggering your limbic system, you're going to have some increased its at some point. And a lot of times there's kind of like thresholds you'll go through where it'll ramp up for a while, and if you stay steady and keep, staying in dose and elevating your mood and working the program, doing incremental training correctly, it will die off. But there's a period you've got to kind of push through of disconnecting from your its and not giving into the sensations, not giving into the thoughts, not giving into fear. And that's so important, because that keeps your brain from keeping you stuck. Because the idea is, your brain will be like, oh, let's not do that, because then we have to deal with it's not it's just so annoying, and I don't like feeling that way, or I'm afraid of them, or whatever it is. This is your chance to break free of that. And it's a once in a lifetime thing, because I tell you, once you break free of your fear of it's, your body will never control you again, and that is an amazing feeling. So this is one area where that's such an important. It's important for recovery as a whole, and if you want to be able to do incremental training correctly and recover, make sure that you understand, like, it's or nothing. That's what we call them. It's nothing. It's nothing. No big deal. I can handle anything life throws my way. I'm not worried about this. Don't worry about it, Libby. I can handle anything that life throws my way. And then as you go through, again, just utilize all your tools. Keep your mental and emotional focus on those positive pathways. If you're having trouble, I have a video about catching pop specifically, so you can check that out if you need to. But just keep your brain in that elevated emotional state the whole time. And if you're doing that, and let me tell you, the magic moments of recovery are when your body is running your brain's like got stuff going on in your body and you've got symptoms, but your brain is clear and you're in an elevated emotional state. And it feels like a bit of dissonance happening between the brain and body when you're doing that. That weird feeling is where the magic happens. And one of my favorite affirmations or kind of opposites is, I trust the weird feeling. Because when you get into that space, it's new. You're moving into new territory in your own mind. This is new neuronal pathways. It's new patterns that are running. And the brain likes what's familiar, and it tends to be afraid of what's new. So kind of purposefully saying, I trust the weird feeling, I trust this new unfamiliar territory, is huge to allowing your brain to slide into your new life, into your new body, into your new brain, your new state of being. That's really huge and really important. So just remember that in that moment when you feel really uncomfortable and you're not sure if it's working and you're like, this just feels so weird, know that is when your brain is being rewired. That is when all the magic is happening, and that's all the miracles are going to come from all the time you spent with, your body in one place, your body in the past, and your mind in the future. That's what's creating your future of a recovered life. So embrace that discomfort, really get snuggly with it, and be like, yeah, this is where it's at. I love that discomfort. Bring it, get really excited and pumped up about it. Okay. Yeah, so another one is plan, measure, repeat, which is what we're told in DNRS. Plan, measure, and repeat what you're doing with rewiring, whether that's, regardless of what it is. Remember that, so planning is you plan in advance, when and what, that you're measuring it. And a lot of times this can just be length of time. If you're not doing something concrete like food or walking or something like that, just the amount of time you're exposing yourself to or doing some activity, that's a good measure. And then repeat it. You want to repeat it. And be kind of, give yourself an idea of how often you want to repeat it and stick to that. Because again, this is all about you running your life instead of your brain running your life. So you want to make sure you're the one deciding how things are going to go. And this is something that I haven't utilized a lot, but I think what I personally took away from that was be strategic, be smart, pay attention to your overall load. And this kind of segues into the next thing is a lot of times, for me, for most of my recovery, well, at least half of it, I've really seen incremental training more as my training zone. How strong are my wires as to how much load I can handle throughout the day. Like, there's all these different things in my environment that my brain used to respond in a negative way to, and it's like, okay, how long can I expose myself to that? But there's just so many over the day, and it's kind of like lifting weights. It's always the analogy that I use, is that this is like, it's like you're lifting weights. And when you walk into a gym the first day you lift weights, you might start with a bar, you might start with, but it's weight. Everything you do in your life, like, this is a stress induced thing. Limbic system impairment is stress induced. And understand, stress is just like a load, like a weight. Like, how much is your brain lifting throughout the day, every day? If you've got something running on autopilot, that doesn't really weigh anything. Anything you do on autopilot without thinking about it is not part of your. If it's already on autopilot, it doesn't weigh anything, is basically how you can look at that. If something takes effort, where you're having to kind of think greater than you feel or override what your brain would naturally want to go, you're lifting weights. You're lifting mental, like, neurological weights when you do that. And it's kind of understanding, like, just like with weightlifting, the point is to get the muscle to failure. But once the muscle gets to failure, there's you literally, I mean, with physical weightlifting, you just can't do another rep, which is different than with this, because you have the illusion in your mind that, like, oh, that's no big deal, because a lot of times what you think you're going to do is no big deal. But if your brain has been weightlifting all day and you haven't realized that, you're not aware of that you've been thinking greater than you feel for a while, or just overall doing more and exercising those new pathways and doing a lot more, that you need to kind of look at your day to day and be like, how much did I increase my workout, my weight load from one day to the next, and just kind of understand that your brain needs time to incrementally adapt to larger and larger loads over time. And it's also going to need rest periods, just like weightlifting. Like, you're going to need days where you don't stretch yourself and you just let your brain rest and let the new pathways solidify. That's a really important part of recovery, is just letting the new pathways, it's like just like a clay structure that you've made, let it set. So that's really huge, is just having a general idea of, like, how many things are going on in your life, and just kind of keeping a sort of intuitive understanding of, like, what's going on, and making sure that no one thing increases dramatically and stays increased dramatically. Another one that for me was honestly never addressed in DNRS, and I figured it out on my own. It was huge part of my incremental training, was training my brain on calm, using calm as my increment, like, just training my brain to be calm, because it had never been calm before in my life on a consistent basis, and it was a new emotional state. Calm is a new emotional state, and when you ever, like, an emotional training zone is a very real thing. Like, for me, I've discovered that when it comes to embodying new ways of being, like allowing myself to be authentic in bigger ways, be more myself and a little bit more expressive, in public or around my husband or other people or something. Whenever I do that, I realize, like, there's a part of me that's like, oh no, I know I deserve to be myself around whoever. Like, I don't need to train on this. And then I'm like, oh no, that's right. Emotional training zones are a thing. I need to, like, not push myself too hard, because it's still new. And my brain can only go so far before it kind of reaches that muscle failure point. And it was the same thing with calm. Like, and this is the thing too, I happened to exist in a category of people where my brain was always way more neuroplastic than it ever needed to be. Like, there were periods of time where I was triggered just constantly, 24/7, for no reason. My brain was just in a rut. It was just massively in overdrive. And so the only thing my incremental training was just getting my brain to calm the F down. That was my incremental training. It was like rounds, mood elevation, like whatever it takes to just calm the brain down, because then everything else will calm down. And then you can start thinking about, like, doing more and that kind of incremental training. But it's something I encountered, and I think a lot of people do, and I see some people in this state who are still trying to do an incremental training because that's what you're supposed to do. If your brain is in that state where you are triggered 24/7, training on calm is your incremental training. Take that and run with it. It works so much better, because if you're already neuroplastic all the time, your brain cannot handle more of a load. And I see a lot of people get, kind of, things get out of hand because they're trying to incrementally train. They're trying to do the right thing, but not, without a baseline of calm. You don't need to trigger your brain to be neuroplastic. That's the thing. So incremental training, the point again is trigger your brain to be neuroplastic and change the association for something to positive. But if you're already neuroplastic, your brain is already in a heightened state. You don't need to trigger that. And if your brain is already in a heightened negative state, it's only to be making negative associations. So your main job is just to make everything positive until the brain calms down. So that's really key. And that one is, again, one that I see a lot of people, when I say that, they're like, really? Oh my gosh, that sounds so relaxing. Like, I can do that. Like, this just wasn't working. And again, I know, just to wrap this up, like, a lot of people, the structure that's given works really well. There's a lot of different takes on this. So this is just my personal take of what worked for me, and I think, there's kind of approaches that work for different percentages of people. But yeah, those are the biggest ones. Like, those are the biggest ones, asking yourself if your life is in your training zone, really focusing on catching your pops around everything. It's huge. Disconnecting from your fear of its, and if you need to, training on calm, and making sure that even if you don't need to train on calm, you're giving your brain a break as you incrementally train. Like maybe once a week, take a day off, or take weekends off, or take, whatever. Try, if you can, to take a day off on at least a weekly basis from incremental training to give your brain a chance to like really relax and not be triggered for a day, or two. Just let yourself be in the flow of life. So yeah, I might do a part 2. If you're still watching this and you have more questions, please drop them in the comments, because I am recovered and I sometimes forget what recovery is like. And I have this is kind of a loaded topic, and I don't want to make these videos too long. So if there's something else I missed that you would like to hear about, please let me know, and I will see if I can make a part 2 about this. All right. Much love to you, my friends. I hope this is helpful and just clears up and makes some people's recoveries faster, because that's what I'm all about. All right. Love you all. Have a great night.